In today's global economy, quality matters. Benjamin Franklin once quipped, "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." Quality Matters is here to talk about all things quality. So whether you're looking to improve your business, getting ready for an audit, or dealing with failed inspections, tune in, check us out, then get back to doing work that matters.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Quality Matters podcast, brought to you by Texas Quality Assurance, where quality management gets simplified. Today, we have an old guest joining us back, Chris Parrish from Oxebridge Resources. Chris is, for one, just an absolutely fantastic consultant, one of the few no-nonsense consultants out there. And he also is a little bit of a, I guess you might call a watchdog of the industry, but we can let him kind of fill us in a little bit more on his unofficial role that really does a lot to help our quality and compliance management type industries. So with that, let's welcome Chris Parrish to the podcast. Howdy, Chris.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Doing good. So for folks that might not have heard you on the podcast, because it's been, 2 years since we had you on here?
Yeah, maybe.
So tell us a little bit, kind of in your own words, about yourself, the work you do, and, really what kind of drives and motivates you to do it.
Well, yeah, Oxbridge is a ISO and AS 9100 consulting company. Started it back in 2000 or so. And at some point, we evolved into a sort of de facto industry watchdog.
Yep.
Not sure how that happened, but we started filing complaints, and then that turned into like a side career. So we sort of keep an eye on the certification bodies, the accreditation bodies, et cetera. And all of that's pro bono work aside from the normal consulting work. But we've had this for a long time. My clients include companies like SpaceX. Everybody knows them.
Yep.
But Northrop Grumman and NASA and a few others, but a lot of small companies, most overwhelmingly small companies.
Yep.
Very similar to what Texas QA does. But please go back and tell everybody more great things about me. You were doing such a good job in the intro.
No, I mean, seriously, though, we really do need folks like you that are out there that are willing and able to kind of go to bat, because it's it's disappointing, but it's, I guess, not surprising that the industry of standards and compliance is really not unlike a lot of other industries, that folks get in and try to find a way that they can scheme and game the system. And it's good we got folks that are out there that are willing and able to fight it. And I know you take a lot of heat for it sometimes. You give a little bit back too. So
yeah, I do. But the standard tells us, these ISO standards and AS standards tell us that we need to analyze defects so that we can improve. And so all I'm doing is throwing that back at ISO and the body, saying, "Hey, you got defects. Let's improve those."
I like it.
They don't like to hear that, though. So,
No, not quite so much. I don't have much experience in here, but I've been on the TC 176 committee. I finally bowed out here recently. I probably need to go update my LinkedIn bio to show that. But what we want to talk about today is the potential for a new update to ISO 9001 coming out. And that means there's likely going to be a 10-year gap between the current new revision to the newest one. So the little bit I saw on it was a big article talking about changes to the continual improvement process. And it just made me sick, some of the suggestions that they were recommending. But I know you've got a lot more up-to-date information there. So kind of tell us a little bit about what folks might be expecting and how soon to expect it.
Well, all signs indicate now that ISO is going to be publishing an early revision of ISO 9001, probably 2025. So that's only a couple of years from now.
Yeah.
And how they went about doing that is not particularly ethical or great. And it depends on whether you think that the standard needs to be revised or not. I'm mixed on the view. I think that ISO 9001 2015 is flawed and it needs to be fixed. But at the same time, the people involved in fixing it are the ones who made the problem to begin with. They're not likely to correct these problems. But and what they're doing to force this early revision is so unethical and in violation of ISO's own procedures. It just creates a lot of concern. Essentially, what happened was every 5 years, ISO has a rule that every 5 years they're going to do an assessment on their standards to see if technology has advanced, which would require a standard to be updated. And that's a good protectable standard. For other standards like ISO 9001, it's a little silly, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Well, they did their 5-year review on the 2015 version in 2020, and the results came out late. They were late in 2021. And the world overwhelmingly voted no, leave the standard alone. Well, ISO is a publishing company, and they only make money if they publish books.
Right. They
don't make money if they don't publish books. Right.
Right.
So they didn't like this result. Now, they had previously done this with the 2008 version. In 2000, they voted, the world voted and said, no, don't update it. And ISO released a version anyway called ISO 9001 2008.
Yeah.
They called it an amendment. There were no changes. They just changed the date on the cover. And it generated a lot of money because people were forced to buy a copy of this standard or they were going to lose their certification.
Yep.
Well, ISO's doing the same thing again this time, but this time it's a little bit worse. So they held this first vote. World voted by a slim majority to say do not update it. ISO didn't like the result. So they came back and they said, well, we really want to take a second crack at that. Are you sure? So they issued a second round of voting. And they sort of asked people, are you sure that you don't want it? And explain yourself. If you voted no, explain yourself. And there was this sort of subtle mafia style thing like, you need to come on board and change your vote, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the second round of votes wound up with a bunch of people like posting a bunch of angry stuff. It was really kind of unprofessional and angry, but they were really adamant about, no, don't update the standard.
Yeah.
ISO wasn't happy about that. So then they did a user survey and the users of the standard overwhelmingly voted, don't update the standard either. At the end of the day, there were 5 different votes and they all voted not to update it. ISO
so of course we're going to update it anyway. Yeah.
Which is really,
only logical.
Really bizarre. Yeah. And what they're relying on is this really obscure sentence in a procedure somewhere that says that in between the 5-year votes, right? If technology has changed, they could do an early revision anyway. But in between 5 usually means 2.5 years.
Right.
ISO's interpreting that to mean 5 minutes after the world voted no. So they're saying we have our procedures, we're following our procedures, we're doing an early revision. We're just doing it earlier than people liked. Well, people voted no, and then 5 minutes later they said we're doing an early revision anyway. So they're ignoring the world's votes, which is against World Trade Organization regulations. They're not allowed to do that. It's against their own procedures. But who's going to hold them accountable?
Yep.
So this new standard is already, and the thing is, what we found out is that I've uncovered internal documents from TC 176 that showed they were working on this a year ago. They've already been crafting the actual text of the new standard already.
Yep.
Now, the ISO officials are saying that's not true. We're not doing anything. We're waiting. And they're going to hold a 6th vote to find out if it's not true. We have the actual internal documents. There's Excel spreadsheets, got all the names and everybody involved in it. And they've already started working on it. Yeah. And they're working very fast. So that's why I'm thinking that a 2025 edition is likely to happen.
And that's kind of scary that they're trying to push it fast as well. Is, oh my gosh, as we've seen with the 2015 edition of the standard, don't get me wrong, 2008 might be a little too simple for our modern age, but 2015 didn't necessarily fix those issues. It just kind of introduced a little ambiguity, which I think is good. I know you. I think you and I might have a little bit of different opinion here, but I'm not actually opposed to the idea of documented information just because I'm an IT guy and I'm a database guy, right? So is a form in my software, does that count as a document or a record or a structure? Like, what is it? And so, okay, I kind of like the freedom we got there, but they just muddied the waters with damn near everything else. And I can only imagine what's about to happen.
Yeah, and what they did was they took out the requirement for documents and records, and in some places they put in this phrase documented information, but in the bulk of other places they put the word determine. It says the organization will determine something. And
how do you prove you determined it?
I not want you to remember that this standard is designed for third-party auditing.
Right.
Right. And so if I'm an auditor and I come in and I say, well, can you prove to me that you determined something? How does the client prove that they determined something?
Yep.
Well, I might show you a documented record, but if I don't have to because the standard didn't require me to do that. Yep. So proving something was determined or not becomes this psychological exercise that auditors are not trained for.
Yep.
So, my hope would be that they would go back to the days when they called out a specific thing, whether they want to call it documented information or not, I don't care, but require something to be proven. But now we have over 50% of the clauses in the standard that don't actually require any evidence.
Yep.
And so an ISO audit now becomes this kind of conversation. And just yesterday, I had a client who was written up on a nonconformity by an auditor who said that there was a required document for this particular clause and it just doesn't exist. It's not in there.
Yeah.
And so now he's in this bind where he has to fight the certification body and say it's not required and risk upsetting the auditor. He doesn't want to do that, but then he doesn't know what to write because the auditor just invented it.
We ran into something this week as well that's somewhat similar, not on the documented information side, but I guess everything ultimately falls in it, but is with corrective actions. And, so the auditor's getting real nitpicky about certain ways that the root cause was identified and separation of preventative actions versus immediate containment and correction. And we debated briefly, should we just go and fight the auditor and, file a dispute on it? We're totally, completely within our rights to do this for our client. But then it's like, we only got one finding out of the audit. Do we want to make a fuss over one finding, or do we just want to take it and move on? And that's what we decided. But again, if you look at the clause 10.2, it says corrective act. It's so, well, that's a whole other rabbit trail to go down. It's so weirdly written. I mean, we get our nonconformances from 8.7 and corrective actions from 10.2, but neither one of them uses the term corrective action report or nonconformance report. Neither one of them talks about containment or preventative, none of this stuff, but we're getting findings on it because the auditor, they don't have any, a schema with which to interpret the standard.
Right. And a lot of this came because the newer standard, this 2015 version, the bulk of the text was not even written by quality management experts. It was written by a bureaucratic entity. I've talked about this on your show previously. This TMB, the Technical Management Board. We don't know who they are. They're not elected. They're not delegates. They're not national representatives. They're not subject to voting. Nobody knows who they are. They wrote the text and they handed it to TC 176. And with this last version, 2015, TC 176 just sat around for 2 years and they kind of said, oh, somebody else wrote the document for us. That's fine. So for 2 years, they were selling seminars and webinars and writing books about this new standard that they didn't even write. And then they didn't have the fortitude or the guts to basically go in and say, you know what you wrote is wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's no quality management expert that wrote this.
Yeah.
This text was written for every possible standard, whether it's quality, environmental, occupational health and safety. It's just so generic. Yeah. And somebody needs to go in and fix that. Now, this new version that they're coming out with in 2025 or so, it's really being forced because that text from ISO Geneva is being updated. And so anytime they update it, you have to update the resulting standard. So the world voted not to update ISO 9001. And then they found they were stuck because we have to, because they updated the core text. So we have to update it. But again, we don't know. We have we know a few people who wrote it, but generally we don't.
Funny way of sneaking that in there, and you got no choice now.
And they're not quality management experts. They're just generic standards people who probably have not ever worked under a management system. Of any sort. So
well, one of the previews that I saw was dealing with continual improvement. They were looking at doing a big revision on the continual improvement process, and I voted no against this. And I remember reading like the text that they were passing around for review, and I'm like, why the heck are we talking about agile development for continual improvement? Like, I'm a software guy. I've done a little bit of product and services design and whatnot. Let me tell you, agile is the catch-all term for computer geeks who don't want to plan. That's what agile is. Well, we're just going to work on this in different phases and stages, and it's this iterative feedback loop, and you spend 10 minutes saying, we're going to do whatever the hell we want, and say it was agile, and we're going to use so much complicated language that you're just not going to argue with us. And I'm like, no. We don't need to be putting that in there.
Well, this will be the first time that you get more hate mail than I do. Because the agile folks are really
look. I'm not saying the agile methodology is, and I've said the same thing with Lean Six Sigma. I have big beefs with the Lean Six Sigma industry. I am not saying that Lean is bad and that Six Sigma methodologies are bad. I'm saying if you're going to do it, you got to do it properly. And it's not the right tool for every situation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And these things become cults. And
Yes.
Lean Six Sigma is a cult, Black Belts are a
yes.
cult, and Agile is a cult.
Yep.
And so what I think what's more likely to have happened in the ISO committee is that somebody heard this word. They don't really know what it means, and they throw it around. And we see that in the 2015 version. They throw words in there like format and media, and these words that I always joke that they're trying to sound hip with the kids. I don't know if they actually know what these things mean, because again, the overwhelming bulk of people writing the standards have actually never worked in a quality management system, which is stunning. They're all consultants, but they came from all different other departments and stuff, supply chain or this or that and the other thing. But they never actually had to work. Whereas I worked for 12 years under 2 different QMSs before I ever started working under with Oxebridge. And I think that work experience is critical. You have to know how to eat your own dog food, and these folks don't, and there's no removing them. They are permanent fixtures.
So what are some of the other
mastered, welding human flesh to metal? They've just welded themselves to the seats. You cannot remove them. And so it is what it is. So it's unlikely that this standard's going to get better. It's probably going to get worse. And of course, the other thing they were talking about was climate change. How are they going to put climate change into ISO 9001? What does that have to do with it?
That was actually the point where I just said I'm bowing out when I saw that come through. That was when I read the last of the emails and notes on there, because I'm like, there's zero chance I'm going to have a say in this, being the new guy amongst hundreds of these folks.
Right.
And when they started talking about climate change, I'm like, oh my gosh, no, we don't need to inject that everywhere. And regardless what you think about it or not, it doesn't need to be injected in every aspect of society.
No, this is a quality management system standard. It has a scope. It has a narrow definition of what it's supposed to be defining. It's not supposed to cure cancer.
No.
But this is just bored people who don't have a lot of work. A lot of these consultants don't have a lot of clients. They don't know what to do. So they're just making work for themselves, and they sit there and they type a lot of stuff and absolutely incompetent. And it's just too bad that we just can't get good people on these committees and invite more companies rather than consultants to represent the committee. But this is what it is. And so we're stuck. So I'm not happy that this standard is getting updated. It needed to be fixed. But the current crop of people who are responsible for it are just not going to do it.
No. It's, and I guess probably folks listening to this, I might be going, well, Kyle, Chris, like, aren't y'all going to have a chance to make a lot of money off this? And honestly, the truth is, when the standard updates, folks shouldn't need help with the transition, but I'd rather not have to make folks do that.
Right. So I might have to make a new copy of this book right here.
Yes.
Yeah, I might have to write a new book.
Not watching.
I don't really want to write a book. I don't really want to write a new one. Okay.
For folks listening,
not to. I have other things I'd like to do.
What book is that?
That's Surviving ISO 9001 2015. Go on Amazon. You can get that. And it talks a lot about the skullduggery behind the scenes of how this latest standard got written, and then of course how to implement.
Well, what are some of the other changes that you see coming with this new edition? Obviously, I've got big issues with the continual improvement side of things. I don't know what they did or didn't do with climate change, but once I saw folks trying to interject that, I said, "Whoa, washing my hands, I'm out." What are some of the things you're seeing coming down in this new edition? Potentially, obviously,
I've seen every single clause touched, everything, which tells me that. And then I had an inside source that is pretty reliable, said that don't sweat it too much. This is just people really over caffeinated. They spend a lot of time working on this, but that at the end of the day, this will filter down and only select portions will be touched. So at this point, I can't tell you. Right now, it looks like they're going to rewrite everything, which is simply not possible. They're not going to do that. They're just dreaming about it right now.
Yeah, and I've seen that the typical way that these things go is nothing ever gets more simple. It always gets more complex, which is, is horribly unfortunate. I mean, it makes sense. It's so much easier to add a new rule, to add a new phrase, new clause, a new something, rather than going back and fixing what was there, which is so funny because we're supposed to be doing root cause analysis for all these problems. But let's just slap on something new.
Well, so we fixed that too. if you go to the Oxebridge website, oxbridge.com, all right, oxebridge.com, there's a free standard called Oxbridge Q1001, Q001. It's free, download it, no copyright violations whatsoever. What we did is we in a group, a team of other people, we rewrote the ISO 9001 standard in plain English.
Yep.
So it completely complies with ISO 9001 and you can implement it, but you don't have to hire a consultant to do it. Now, I know I'm cannibalizing my own industry, but the fact is that at the end of the day, there are going to be people who hire a consultant and they'll come to me or they'll come to Texas QA, right?
Yep.
There'll be other people who are never going to, they can't afford it. They're just, they don't like consultants. They're never going to do it. So why alienate them? Let's give them a resource anyway. Right?
Totally.
So we throw them some free things. And I know Texas QA is doing the same thing. Yep. We offer them a free service. And those are clients we're never going to get because maybe they just don't have the money. And that's
Agreed.
Cool. I'm happy with that, right? I'd rather see us give away something free than charge them $5,000 and steal their money. Yeah. So you can go to oxbridge.com, download this alternative standard, implement that, and you'll automatically comply with ISO 9001. And we're actually working on version 2.0 of that, which is going to be pretty radical because, again, it's just rephrasing the ISO standard in plain English. But now we have to, our procedures here require us to justify why is that clause in there?
Yeah.
And if it can't be justified, it needs to get ejected.
Right? I agree.
So we justify with a statement of intent every single clause. Why is that there? In ISO 9001, for example, there's an entire clause on organizational knowledge. Now, no one knows why that's there. Behind the scenes, the authors were concerned that you would have somebody in your company who knew everything and then they retired.
Right.
And you lost all that information. Well, the standard doesn't say that.
No.
Right. So now we're saying that this is to prevent you from losing information if somebody should leave or some other change in the company happens. Right. And that helps you understand, oh, that's why that clause is there. Now I know why I'm doing it.
Yep.
The little things like that you'll see with the 2.0. But right now the 1.3 version is out and again, it's free. There's no harm. Just download it and read it and see if it helps.
We'll make sure there's a hyperlink below, but yeah, that's definitely something I love about you as well. Is like, I mean, we're in the same mind here. It's like, if I can make a profit and I can do some work and I can add some value to your company, great, fantastic. Let's do the best we can. But there's a lot of other businesses out there that just simply cannot afford it, or perhaps it's someone, some unlucky guy that got tossed the title of quality coordinator and he has no responsibility, no budget, no nothing. I'm sorry, no authority, all responsibility, no authority, no budget, and he needs something to do some good. And so, yeah, there's tons of free stuff out there. I've put probably half our QMS bootcamp training online for free because I hope it'll be useful to someone. I really don't. I'm not going to say I don't care if I don't find a way to make a buck off of it. Of course, we all want to make a buck, but I just love hearing that it was useful for someone and they put it in practice.
Well, we're not going to make any money from the companies that can't afford it anyway.
Nope.
So let's not rip them off.
Exactly.
Then we can sleep at night, right?
Yes.
And so the companies that need a consultant and can pay for it, then they come to us. And and I know that you and I, neither one of us are unreasonable too. So
no. And I'll be honest with you, a third of the consulting work I've ever done has been cleanup for someone else.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we'll not gonna mention any names, but there's a couple of players out there that it's not uncommon that when we come in to do consultation work, we found out, oh, they built your system for you 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. Cool.
I have one certificate mill out there. They sell a fake certificate.
Yeah.
And what happens is the company, pays like $500, they get it, and then somebody, Lockheed Martin, Boeing says that's fake, and I get a lot of work from that.
Yeah.
And it's too bad that they had to burn up $500 or $1,000 that they lost. They're not getting that back.
No. And what we'll run into is kind of the same problem that I think we see with the new edition of the standard is this increasing complexity. And I'll be honest with you, I have the same issue. Is if I'm taking a look at a procedure and I don't know all of the history and context there, man, it is incredibly painful to delete that line from the procedure because I don't know why it was there to begin with. And deleting something is just, it's painful to do. But that's what we've seen a lot of times of these consultation projects is there may be 300 pages of documentation for a company with 20 employees. I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, our business ain't that complicated. We don't really need all this. And they recognize that they don't need it all, but they have no clue where to start deleting. And so that's kind of where we come in a lot of times, but it's a lot of the same issues we have with the standard is it just folks don't like to say, let's make it simpler. Let's add all these contingencies in here. But I think you hit the nail on the head earlier, is that ISO 9001 standard is not meant to do everything. It is meant to be a generic management system standard, but we really shouldn't have so much emphasis on interested parties, because we might have safety requirements and environmental requirements and local ordinances that they have to meet. And it's like, well, then they just need to go get compliance 14 or 45,001 instead, because they cover that.
I think that's probably another conversation. That clause was a good idea that went sideways fast.
Yes.
The idea of, before you implement ISO, you should understand who you're serving and what do they care about.
Yeah.
So, for example, I just gave some training on this, and I said, like, if you're selling paint and you don't understand that your customers are not dentists, you need to understand who your customers are.
Yeah.
Right. What they care about. I get that. And there's a way that they could have phrased that with like 2 or 3 sentences instead of an entire set of clauses. I think it's important. I thought that was a good addition, but then they worded it. It is actually literally impossible to understand.
No, I completely agree with you there, because in the 2008 edition of the standard, the requirement for legal requirements was in clause 1, which isn't auditable. So it's like, why even put it there if it's not auditable?
Right.
And so, I kind of get
where mixed feelings about that. I don't want auditors pretending to be lawyers. But you are required to comply with the law. So
yeah,
I don't know what.
Well, and that's something we have a fun time with when we do 14 and 45,001. Is like, okay, well, you need to meet your legal requirements. Cool. Who determines what is and isn't legally applicable to each company? So ultimately, the auditor just kind of has to take it on faith that, yeah, you did a good legal assessment.
It is a very difficult thing for those two standards, because a given company can have legal requirements from the federal level, the government level, state and county and city.
Yeah.
They have to know all of those. And sometimes those requirements can conflict. And no consultant is going to be able to resolve that.
Nah.
So the only thing that consultants can do with those standards is you do your best first pass, and you provide the tools for the company to identify legal resources, et cetera, or legal requirements. And everybody just sort of holds their nose and issues certificates, right? But when you read the literal language of the standard, you're not supposed to. It's almost impossible to fully comply with those standards.
I agree there as well. Now, when the new ISO 9001 comes out, and whether it happens in 2025 or not, I'm certain they're going to come up with something new, because there's been just far too much talk about it. And they've gone long, correct me if I'm wrong, but they've never gone this long between revisions of the standard, have they?
No,
have they ever had a 10-year gap?
Are we in a 10-year gap? I guess
2015 to 2025. I think that'll be the biggest gap yet.
Yeah, you might be right. I hadn't thought about that. Seems like yesterday to me.
I know.
But I'm aging faster than you are.
And so, I mean, it kind of makes sense that they're going to come out with something new. But again, for folks listening that maybe don't know how the transition works, like, what's that mean for folks going forward when the 2025 comes around? How do you go from, hey, I'm certified 2015 to I'm certified 2025? Well,
history tells us that there will always be a 3-year implementation period. So even if they do hit it in 2025, and again, we don't know that, I'm guessing, but it just looks like that, you would still have till 2028 to implement it and get certified to it and get audited to it. So there'll be a 3-year gap there no matter what.
Yeah. So it's not this overnight process, but
no.
What are some of, I guess, for you, the most troubling updates that you've seen coming with the new edition of the standard? Now, again, it's all speculative. We're not sure what anything is.
Yeah, I think that my concern now is the trouble with what we have now that's not getting fixed. One of those clauses is that clause 4. That context of the organization is so poorly written. The clauses are literally out of sequence. They're in the wrong order.
Yes.
The clause on risk is terrible.
Yep.
The lack of a preventive action clause is criminal.
I agree.
I've said this before, that the new standard really just says you can just put out fires after they've already happened. Don't worry about stopping them beforehand, which is dangerous.
Yeah.
They point you to risk and say, well, that sort of covers preventive, but it really doesn't.
No.
So I'd rather see them fix what's broken rather than adding new stuff.
I would agree there. They talk about in what the that A4, that annex to A4, they basically say that risk-based thinking is supposed to be preventative action. And I'm like, why not just say preventative actions?
Well, I had a very interesting conversation just last week with somebody who is very knowledgeable. I can't mention any names. People know who they are. And I can't even tell you the details of the conversation because it would just blow up the industry. But the fact is that someone got in at the last minute and injected text into the standard after it already be written. And it was done as a marketing framing kind of thing. So the introduction in the annex had already been written by someone else, and somebody else stepped in, erased that, and replaced it with this text about risk-based thinking and all these sort of things. And it was not done with the best of intentions. I'll just leave it at that. So if you're confused by the annex and the introduction, there's a reason. There was one person behind that.
That makes a lot of sense, because it is. You read that A4 annex, you go back to the clause, and you're like, I don't think they're on the same wavelength here.
Yeah, they're written at different times. The text had already been finished, and somebody just threw it in, and is sort of a justification thing of why. What really happened is they ran out of time. They couldn't. They couldn't finish the standard. They wrote to ISO and said, "Can you give us an extension?" They said no, and so then they wrote this surrounding this bookended matter to try to justify what was in the middle. I don't think it worked, but a lot of people believe it.
I agree.
So they think it's real.
Obviously, context the organization. I agree with you. It's out of sync. It's out of order. You read through it, and I'm like, I'm not real sure what I'm supposed to do here. I think at the end, it's pretty simple. It's like you said, what do you do? Who do you do it for? Where are you? Does your business actually make sense that you could be profitable and functional? But context the organization, risk-based thinking's funky, documented information's too vague. The non-conformance corrective action clauses really don't directly cover non-conformance and corrective actions very well. What else are some of the other problems that you think would be beneficial to be fixed?
There's a weird clause. If you have to go back and read 8.2, which is what do they call it? The requirements, understanding requirements. What it's called, but it's the contract review clause, right?
Yes.
They've taken the position that you're supposed to determine requirements before you actually offer a product to the customer.
Yes.
It's a bizarre thing. So if you're a company like most companies that you take an order from a customer, you review the order, and then you decide whether you're going to accept it or not. That's not what the standard says. The standard's telling you need to review your requirements before you offer products to the customer. It's a bizarre wording. Everybody just ignores it, or they just don't interpret it that way. Right? Most companies, they get a request for quote, they review that, they provide a quote, or they say no. Then they get a PO, and then they review the PO, and then they agree to it or not. That's how it works. But the way the standard says is that before you even offer anything to the market, you're supposed to review your requirements. But the reality is that I may just say, I make metal parts.
Right.
And then the individual company comes to me. The customer says, oh, well, I want you to make me a birdhouse. And another guy says, I want you to make me a rocket. And another guy says, I want you to make me a toilet. And I'm going to decide, okay, which one of those do I make? That's not the way the standard's written. So that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And the design clause, you spoke about agile. I think what they did was an attempt to make agile. They took a traditional waterfall model, and under the clause on design controls, they just shuffled them.
Yes.
And then they said, now it's agile. You can do anything you want in any sequence. You can do validation before verification. You can do reviews at the end. You can do, I don't know, like a CDR after the PDR. I don't know. It makes no sense whatsoever.
No.
And with the old standard, the 2008 version was really easy, super easy to understand. You just everything was in nice sequence. You didn't have to do it in that sequence,
right?
But it presented itself in a sequence.
Yep.
The new one actually has you doing, I think, reviews of outputs before the clause on creating the design outputs.
Yeah,
makes no sense.
Yeah,
and so the average reader is confused.
Yep.
So they need to fix these things.
No, I agree. The best way I found around that issue with design is we just created a simple Excel spreadsheet. And I've got this again for free on the website for anyone who wants to go look at it. We've got a design basically summary sheet, because I recognize engineers, creative folks, they're going to do things in all sorts of weird, funky manners, right? Let them have some freedom there. But if we can't at the end, or at least as we go through it, these whatever predefined reviews we have, which you got to have some predefined reviews, or you ain't doing nothing worthwhile. But just fill out the sheet, and then at the end, your future self will thank you in 2 years when you need to go back and redesign one of those specifications or one of those drawings. Oh yeah, these are all the drawings that we output as a result of this project. Okay, cool. There we go. I've got a little one pager that tells me, hey, we finally validated it, maybe the 10th attempt, but we finally validated it here in May. And this was the test we used. And there's the work instruction they used to do the validation. Cool. I got everything I need. But yeah, you can't go to the standard to tell you what to do when.
No, and it's unfortunate because you can satisfy that clause with very simple solutions like that, but you'd never know it if you read the standard.
No.
Which is intentional. They want you to have to hire a consultant because the people writing it are all consultants.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
So
Isn't it coincidence?
And, I don't need that business.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish the standard was easy, and then I would just get the people who really were totally confused and didn't understand it.
Right.
But to try to build in this business for yourself by let's make it as confusing as we can because then we'll sell books later.
Yeah,
that's just shady.
No, I completely agree there. Well, anything else in regard to the changes to the standard you want to address before we wrap up here?
Don't. Please, ISO, don't. Or if you're going to change it, make it better.
Yeah.
Put me on the committee already, and let's stop this nonsense of me being banned.
Well, and I think that there's just too daggum many people involved. I mean, and I didn't get very deep into it because I very quickly realized how teeny tiny of a fish I am and the countless documents they sent for review. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, why on earth are y'all asking me to look at this document? I ain't got no
End of the day, the
expertise
text
on
is
this.
literally written by maybe 3 people. There's one guy who writes the Annex SL text, right, out of the Netherlands. And then there's a handful of people who write the text for the actual standard. One of them is in the United States, 1 or 2 of them, and a couple of them elsewhere else. The rest of it's all theater. All of that sharing of documents and sending in spreadsheets and everything, it's all just theater. It's just to make it look like, oh, look, we did all this stuff. But at the end of the day, one guy wrote something.
Yep.
And it gets in the standard, and that's it.
Well, and that was
to
the
get to that
question
person.
I had is like, well, if I have something I want to submit as a revision, how do I go about doing it? And I'm sure I could have dug deeper and asked a lot more people, but it wasn't really obvious that I truly had a say in getting something for everyone else to read and review. And it's like, this is just, it's sad. It's really sad that that it operates this way. But
I was on TC 176 as well, and I had to step down for the same reason.
Yeah.
Except I got yelled at. Literally. That was fun.
Well, I guess probably something I want to finish on is I know that you have your comic strip series, which I think is probably something that most folks wouldn't consider coming from geeky quality guys. But so I just love seeing the stuff on LinkedIn. I think they're funny. So tell me a little bit about, your comic strips. I know you're wanting to maybe do some stuff to live stream some of the details of it. So kind of in that lighthearted note, tell me about this comic strip, how you got started and how do you go from being a quality with SpaceX to comics?
So I actually worked in the comic industry for a very brief time in the 90s.
Okay.
And got paid. So I was professional for a very short period of time. And it just didn't, there's no money there, and it couldn't pay the bills, and I had a kid and everything. It just couldn't pay it. So I could never make that jump to do that professionally, but that part of me was always in the back of my head.
Yeah.
But I was a writer, not an artist. And I had this idea to do a comic strip on ISO and just sort of purge all my frustrations in a comic strip. But I'm not really an artist. And then so it took me years to really develop the character and everything and draw it down. And then eventually it just fell in. All the pieces fell together. If you look at the comic strip, which is, again, free at Oxebridge.com, you can just read them. There's hundreds of them at this point. But, the art is limited because I'm not an artist. I'm a writer. But it really goes into, a lot of all the frustrations and so much of it is real. And the thing, and I've always put in the bottom, it says this really happened.
Yes.
So I'll do a comic strip with some outlandish thing with this auditor who is this very abusive, antisocial kind of auditor, always harassing his clients.
Yeah.
And then, it'll end, this really happened. And when I say that, I mean, it really did happen. It really did. And some of the things are outlandish.
I've read a couple of them. I'm like, I think I actually know where this might have happened, but I can't say anything on that.
Yeah.
The
all
barbecue
free, though,
one
so,
recently.
I mean, it's just a fun aside. The only thing is that sometimes I swear because it is frustrating. So there's a profanity warning on the strip. There's no nudity or anything like that. But
no, it's
profanity filters.
It's funny and it's sad but true. But these things really do happen, and I've been involved in a couple of them before on the receiving end of it. And I'm like, oh gosh. So yeah, it's definitely fun for anyone in the quality or management type positions. Like, check it out. It's a good little chuckle. It's a good laugh. It's fun. But man, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on here. Really enjoyed working with you. Looking forward to doing some more work together here in the future. And we need you to keep fighting the fight for us here with these standards. So keep it up, man.
Great. Thanks a lot, and keep up the show. It's doing great.
Awesome. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Well, that is it for today's episode. So really super excited to have Chris on here. And while we are, I guess, direct competition, we've done a number of projects together, really try to work together to collaborate. And, you know, this is something that we keep running into in different topics on this podcast is the amount that we really need to try to work together better, collaborate with one another, that there's so much more good that can be done. And that's really what I love most about this quality management world is there's just an absolute depth of good that can be done. And we really love working with the small business clients we have too. So be sure, if you want to support our podcast, what we're doing, make sure you subscribe, like, and share it. Be sure to leave us a review, especially iTunes. We really, really appreciate those iTunes reviews. We're trying to crank this higher and higher up the charts, but we cannot do that without your subscription, your feedback, likes, and shares. If you have any questions about quality management, don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm going to make sure that we've got tons of links in the show notes for everything we got from Chris Paris. So with that, you guys have a great